All right, welcome to part three, where we'll talk about carbohydrates, and we'll kind of start with a review. So, carbohydrates, like we said, are basically sugars. You can have simple sugars, you can have a little more complex sugars, and you can have very, very complex sugars. Um, and that basically goes from glucose, which is what your brain loves to eat, sucrose, which is table sugar and which you can crave on your tongue, all the way up to starch, which takes a lot of energy to break down. Okay, so in the end, though, carbohydrates are short-term energy storage. They can even be used as receptors especially in terms of like blood sugar levels. Structural role in plants and fungal cell walls and chitin, and also in cellulose. Cellulose being one of those OSE words that we have. OSE. And that kind of denotes a sugar. Okay, and so chitin's also found in exoskeletons of insects. But again, remember why we need to know carbohydrates is because it's a food source for bacteria, for our brains. That's mainly the name of the game for carbohydrates. Okay, so the simplest of carbohydrates are called monosaccharides. And if you just break that word into two, you have one uh, mono, monorail, and saccharides being sugars. Okay, that's just another word of saying sugars, like saccharin means sweet. And you can have multiple types of sugars, and they are named after how many carbons that they have. So triose means 3, pentose is 5, and hexose is 6. Okay, so a 6 carbon sugar is main one that we're going to be talking about here when we talk about carbohydrates and food sources. And glucose is our number one representative of both a hexose and a food source. Like I say, primary source for in the brain. Interestingly, it's also the primary source of tumor cells. Okay, so when we draw out a model of a sugar, we use this notation, but the double bond is kind of tenuous at best, and we can try to, and it takes many shapes. And so in the form that we see it in the cell, it is primarily in this shape. So if you were to take this and kind of map it out into a 3D structure, that's what you would get. And that kind of makes like a nice hexagon and a nice place for signaling. That kind of works as a signal, and you can kind of take that ending away and make other things in there. Okay, and so like I said, you can uh, bond at here with a maltose, well, with another sugar rather. And if you take two glucoses and bind them together, you get a disaccharide or two sugars called maltose. Okay, and you can take galactose and glucose and make lactose, and you can take um, table sugar and get glucose and fructose together. And interestingly, high fructose corn syrup is just a mixture of glucose and fructose. And if you mix it in 50-50, it's not as sweet. And it's because we don't have to break that bond between them. We just taste the glucose and we just taste the fructose in separately. And then they add more fructose, high fructose corn syrup, in order to get it to taste sweeter. Okay, because the 50-50 ratio only works with that bond is actually there on a disaccharide. Okay, and the second thing that you need to know is that you have disaccharides, but why we need to know those is because if you build upon those some more, you can get what's known as a polysaccharide. And we need to know polysaccharides because of peptidoglycan, right? Which kind of looks exactly like glycogen. We're going to stack on glycan and some peptides, but it's got that branching look, as we'll see in the next slide. Cellulose is what makes cell walls in plants and what gives them their rigidity. Lignin is what gives trees their ultimate strength, and that's also a polysaccharide. And starch. Starch is found in bread, and we break them down into their simple sugars using a salivary amylase, which is fitting. It's an enzyme that breaks down this amyl bond. And then we taste the simple sugars. So as you eat a saltine, it becomes sweeter and sweeter because you have the sugars on your mouth. And those are polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are important because of cellulose, glycogen, and glycan all kind of make up cell walls and how cells interact with one another and protect themselves from desiccation, drying, and other external threats. And so here's a picture of glycan. I thought I'd include it so you can see it when we talk about peptidoglycan. You know that we're talking about glycan branching a whole bunch onto these peptides. And we'll go into that lipids in our next video.